Hey everyone, another awesome week of Come Follow Me. We're in the book of Ezekiel, which to a lot of people, you're like, I don't even know this book existed. It's just another one of those, like, it's a longer book, and it's one that's not as often studied because we tend to focus on Isaiah, which has awesome things, but there's a lot of really good lessons to learn from Ezekiel too, just like there was from Jeremiah. And it seems like we're just trying to squish it all in 1 week. So I've prayerfully selected actually 4 points this week because I wanted to teach you firstly a little bit about Ezekiel. It just helps to give you a better perspective on what they're speaking about and why this means so much to them. Because Ezekiel speaks a lot about temples and has a lot of imagery around the temple. And it makes more sense if you know a bit of his background. So let's get started. I've got long notes, but only highlighted a few things for you. So, needless to say it all, that Ezekiel lived in turbulent times. He was in Jerusalem during Jeremiah's ministry as a youth. And as he got older and it began to crumble, and when that first wave came in, that's when Daniel was taken. And we read about him next week. But that's when Daniel was taken. And the second wave, Ezekiel gets taken. Interestingly enough, just after his 30th birthday. Now, he mentions this in the first chapter, and then there's like this sort of vision that he has, and you're all kind of looking at it going, what the heck is he talking about? We'll get to that, don't worry. So, it goes over a lot of the history that you can look up, and if you want to know more about the actual history and when he fits, I can do that, but often for most of us, we just want to know more about the guy himself. So, in exile, Ezekiel is called to be a prophet. Now, he was from a priestly family, and they started serving in the temple. They were raised to do this. That was like their job calling, if you will. Raised to serve in the temple as a priest. Now, they started to do this when they turned 30. So he was on the banks of this river, when he got this vision, being like, I've just been taken captive, but I'm supposed to start in the temple. And I need to be there, and just feeling this what the heck? So it's because he was from that priestly family, as I said, he ministered to his fellow exiles as a prophet priest. He was married, and he lived a relatively free life along with the fellow exiles. So while they were taken captivity, they were sort of living under house arrest. It's not that they were in slavery bondage, but they were captive. So they weren't allowed to go back to Jerusalem. They were on house arrest so that they could be oppressed and controlled by the Babylonians because they didn't want them overrunning them. So that's basically it. So they were sort of on house arrest, but they could still go out and have jobs and see each other and visit, but it was just, like a lockdown. Much like COVID lockdown, really, isn't it? So something like house arrest. So as a priest, he was associated with the temple, but he's now cut off from it. All the training he's done his entire life, he's now been cut off from. His prophetic message had much to do with the temple and its rituals. So like Jeremiah, he sometimes acted out his message using symbolic images, and you'll see that a lot when you read through it, as there's a lot of symbolism. Ezekiel's influence upon the exiles was significant, and he greatly affected their thinking. So Ezekiel knew great sadness too, great personal sadness. While in exile, being informed by the Lord that Jerusalem was under attack again, and this time it was going to be completely destroyed and everyone taken captive, he was told that his wife would also die, and that just as the delight of Israel's eyes, the temple would be gone, so the delight of his eyes, his wife, would be gone, taken. And you'll find that in chapter 24, verses 1 to 14. And then he was told in 24:15 to 27, but to not mourn publicly for his wife, so that people would know they should not mourn for Jerusalem, because they're going to get back there one day, and just like Ezekiel's going to get his wife back one day, which I'm sure they've been happily living for many thousands of years, a couple of thousand years or so, together. So there you go. But, in that moment, it's heartbreaking, right? So after Jerusalem fell, this is after he's lost his wife, so most people would go into this tailspin of woe is me. Instead, Ezekiel's message became one of hope. the Lord's people would experience a restoration and enjoy a future redemption. And that's why we study the chapters that we do and what we're going to talk about, because it's about that future restoration. He shows in vision to Ezekiel exactly what the Lord's power can do, and there's messages in there not just for the people then, but for now, which is really awesome. And similar things to President Nelson has taught now is what Ezekiel taught then. It's pretty cool. His ministry lasted until at least 574 BC, so we're not that far before Christ, really, in the grand scheme of the earthly history. Joseph Smith said specifically that he was one of the ancients who made his calling and election sure, and he did a really good job. Ezekiel grew up in or near Jerusalem, but was taken captive by the Babylonians, as I said, 598 BC. His name, interestingly, means God strengthens, similar to the meaning of Hezekiah, which is Jehovah strengthens. So Ezekiel, God strengthens. Beautiful name. Ezekiel, like Jeremiah, was of priestly lineage, as I said, though there is no explanation or explicit mention of what their Aaronic priesthood functions or ordinances were. So we don't really know what that was, but we do know that they held the Aaronic priesthood all the way from Aaron, back in the time of Moses. They held that, and that they had purposes in the temple for what they had to do. We just don't know exactly what they were. He doesn't mention what his training was going to lead him to. Maybe he wasn't even sure. He just knew he had to turn up and they were going to start training him in those roles. So maybe he never got there. Isaiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, and Zechariah, and John the Beloved had some unique apocalyptic visions of future things. So we're going to concentrate on Daniel next week. We've already done Isaiah. We know that they had these visions, these apocalyptic visions of the future. But so did Zechariah, and so does John, as we read in Revelation and through the book of John. But yeah, there you go. So President Wilford Woodruff, he described the purpose of such unusual revelations, because as you're reading some of this, you're like, what does it even mean? And is it even that important to know exactly what it means, or do we just take the message from it? Because really, all we really need is the message from it. Let me read the quote from President Wilford Woodruff, and that'll make some more sense around it. So he said, "The Lord does communicate some things of importance to the children of men by means of visions and dreams, as well as by the records of divine truth. And what is it all for? It is to teach us a principle. We may never see anything take place exactly as we see it in a dream or a vision, yet it is intended to teach us a principle." So I think it's very good, because what they're describing, we may never see that. And they're trying to describe things of heaven that really just don't have words in our earthly languages. There's just no words for them. There's a lot of words that exist out there that just don't even translate into English, for example, because there's just no similar word. So we come up with like something that's as close as, but it's never quite the same. So it's like trying to describe these things that you see. It's like trying to describe color to someone who's blind. How do you describe a blue sky to someone who's never seen the color blue? It's really hard. So that's what they're trying to do. They've seen heavenly things. They're trying to describe them, and they're doing the best they can using the images they have seen. And it sort of doesn't entirely make sense to us now. But what's important is that we take that message. So look for that. Just like Isaiah. Look for the message. You'll be good. Ezekiel reverently and cautiously described the likeness as the appearance of a man who was upon the likeness of the throne. So talking about Christ on a throne, or God on a throne. With a brightness which was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord, because it's as close as he could put it. When you're trying to describe the glory of the Lord, if you haven't seen that, and someone has seen it and they're trying to describe it to you, it's going to be tricky. So there you go. And that's in verses 26 to 28 of chapter 1. Talks about that. It is extraordinarily difficult to describe heavenly things with earthly words. Compare his description of the heavenly being in Ezekiel 8:2, and compare all this with Isaiah's vision of the Lord in Isaiah 6. I think you'll find some really interesting similarities in that. So that's Ezekiel 8, specifically verse 2, and go back and look at Isaiah 6 and see how some of the imagery described, very similar descriptions, and yet we know that wasn't exactly like that. It's like a poetic, apocalyptic, trying to describe something that is almost impossible to describe with earthly words. So keep those things in mind when you're reading Ezekiel, because it does start off with that vision. And that vision is more about his call, what he's supposed to go on and do, and that he gets to see heaven, and he gets to see, and you'll read through, these things that the Lord shows him that you're like, oh, I don't quite get that. And it's like, it's all right, just get the message from it. And that's some of the things we're going to look at. So hang around for that. Yeah, that was insight number 1. Sorry it went a bit long, but good information. Better understand Ezekiel. All right, I'll see you soon for the second one.